The presentation of the superintendent's proposed budget for fiscal year 16. In addition to that, however, we do have another order of business directly related to the budget concerning the expenditure of Title I funds. And so we will begin with that item. The superintendent will provide us with an update and information relative to that and answer any questions that we have concerning that matter, and then we will move directly into the presentation of the proposed budget. I would also add that there is information related to the expenditure of Title I funds in terms of a plan going forward to address and mitigate these issues that will be posted on board docs momentarily for public access. Dr. King?
Chairman Houston, members of the board, staff, and public. Before we move further into the general fund discussion as well as operating fund, etc., I would like to take this opportunity to publicly address my current division's concerns with Title I and Title I fund utilization. First, of course, I feel that it is important to note that these funds are generated based on the percentage of students that qualify for free or reduced lunch within our system and should be used to benefit and address the needs of those students as outlined. We have a large percentage, a large proportion of our student body that fit that category. Approximately 67 to 70% of our students qualify for free or reduced lunch. So for obvious reasons, those funds that are allotted to our school division from the federal level are allotted for a purpose and for an important purpose. So some examples that I would like to quickly give for clarity in terms of how those funds should align with the needs of our strategic plan center on several items. I'm going to give some examples. Such funds could be used to provide additional highly qualified staff to support our Title I students that need it the most. Secondly, those funds could be used to support professional development, professional learning efforts for teachers and or staff to meet the needs of those Title I students. Third, increased parent involvement efforts, also highlighted in terms of district-level learning opportunities for parents as well. Those funds are funds that can be earmarked and utilized for that purpose. Lastly, I would like to highlight a final example, which is that the funds could provide extended learning opportunities for the title students as well. So along that line, clearly, these are important needs within our school division, and every penny should be maximized. I'll be clear. Every penny should be maximized, and these services to our children should allow us to expedite that process of being able to align the strategy, the delivery and implementation of the strategies within our strategic plan. Obviously, my expectations were not met at the 100% level. More specifically, my organizational structure has the responsibility of Title I resting within the teaching and learning department, which of course ultimately has been headed up by a deputy for teaching and learning, a deputy superintendent for teaching and learning. In addition, I say without hesitation and with total transparency that because my expectation at the cabinet level of members of my cabinet that report directly to me, those expectations are clear. Those expectations are clear and delivered in multiple ways. Initially, in a pre-conference opportunity that I provide each year, followed by formative discussions and conferences around expectations of performance, and closed by summative discussions and deliveries of pertinent objectives as well. So with that said, desired results in that regard were not met. And as the CEO of this organization, of this division, I have made adjustments accordingly, both from the personnel standpoint as well as from a programmatic standpoint. Have made adjustments, and also I am in the process of continuing those adjustments and continuing internal review as it relates to that. Personnel actions can be discussed, of course, at a definitive level about individual positions and people in executive session, but I wanted to publicly state as much as I could, possibly in terms of what that means. I have provided those programmatic adjustments that I am ordering as a result of the identified area of concern. I'm providing that to the board, and I am also providing my identified area of concern to the public. The format for that centers on the objective that outlines, in my view, the area of concern. It includes action steps to be taken, multiple action steps to be taken from an additional oversight standpoint internally. Within each of those action steps, I have included a timeline as well as responsible staff, along with an evaluation process and an evidence of completion. One action step centers on securing a highly qualified staff to serve as the division's senior coordinator of Title I programs, who will be responsible for having daily oversight of title funding allocated to individual schools and the central office. Again, a timeline for that, as well as responsible staff that will work to implement that action step, along with evidence of completion. Secondly, an action step to reassign pertinent positions to the Division of Business and Finance in terms of the notion of analyzing. So any particular position that relates to an analyst for the purpose of title funds, I am looking at reassigning. And so what are some examples of those? Some examples of those are budget analysts for the Title I office, as well as budget technicians, as well as the budget technician for Office of School Turnaround in terms of classified, as well as additional technical education positions to work to ensure that the dollar and cents end of the matter is addressed in that way. I would reiterate that there's a difference in the analyst piece, which I consider of interest as it relates to the finance piece, and the programmatic piece, which relates to the planning piece. I will move forward as well with presenting the proposed Title I budget to Executive Cabinet for review and discussion, because as we think about the overarching needs of the division with the large proportion of Title I, large proportion of students that allow us to secure Title I funds, then the notion also comes into play that the window for these services will open July 1 of each year, for the most part. And as of July 1, the division has the opportunity to submit its request in totality to the state. And so a needed action step, in my view, will be to have that plan draft developed early to be presented to the cabinet prior to July, allowing that application to move forward in a timely manner to the state no later, hopefully, than the second week in July so that approval can be given. The reason for that is that I would like to see the money begin to flow at least within the area of the month of October. We start school typically in September. So if we can see monies flow at the beginning of October, then it allows us more time to utilize those funds for the appropriate purpose for the children, again, that need it. And the key is that those funds should help expedite the implementation of our strategies and our strategic plan for those children. If you consider the fact that the money can flow at that point, we have more time between the beginning of the school year and the following year of September 30th, the end of the September 30th, whereby in many cases you're required to spend 85% of those funds. I will also remind all of us, the stakeholders, the board, all involved, that we spent approximately $25.1 million in reference to title funds. We spent approximately $25.1 million, when we could have had the opportunity to spend $26 million. So when we leave one penny on the table, that is certainly going to be of concern for me. So implications are before us, in my view, for CH 114 as well as CH 113, which are different funding periods that would fall into the category that I just described in terms of spending that $25 million that we did utilize, but the notion that we could have utilized 26. And that is the concern that I have, and that is the concern that my organization has. And so, again, it is a concern that I take seriously. As I mentioned earlier, personnel actions are being taken, as well as those programmatic actions that I capsuled. My allegiance, of course, is to the children and the parents. And my goal is not simply to expect my organization to expend funds or to spend monies, but that our organization utilizes those funds as the investment that it should, and that we make the most effective and efficient decisions for our children. And so with that said, I will continue to look internally and make the adjustments that are necessary for us to begin to move forward. I'll pause there.
Questions, comments from the board? Dr. Stewart.
I'd like to ask Dr. Thornton a couple of questions that's foundational information. Dr. Thornton, since you've been at the Norfolk Public Schools, and we're awful glad that you're here, have school-level financial reports been made to the school board?
No. The regularly presented monthly financial reports
Yes.
Provide the school board with an overview of the operating budget to actual, as well as the child nutrition school food services program.
In your previous system,
Yes, sir.
a very respected school system where you served very well, were school-level financial reports presented to the board on a regular basis?
No. Basically just the appropriated funds again.
Now, this is in your opinion, so I'll ask the question and you respond in ways
Yes,
that you think are most useful to help me, our colleague board members, and our neighbors understand. In your opinion, can you estimate the primary originating source of unspent funds? And I'll give you two choices, and if you want other ways of responding, please do. Choice one, school-level unspending, or central staff unspending?
A combination. Disproportionate amount of the funds are earmarked for the schools to support teaching and learning, as Dr. King mentioned. So I would say that across the board, it was a combination of schools and central office, but because the disproportionate amount of the funds are at the school level, then you would say that it's at the school level.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
All those questions are designed to fix the problem, not the blame. Dr. King has already begun to fix the problem, not the blame. Dr. King, I have several questions, again, in the same spirit of fixing the problem and not the blame. Let's go back to when. I believe, from what I've seen so far, we can trace the unspending back to school year 2012-2013.
CH 113, the window opened July 2012.
2012, gotcha. And in the first period of spending, how much money was unspent?
The first period for CH 113, we were allotted $15.3 million. We spent approximately $14.6 million, which leaves a balance of approximately $600,000 that was not spent. $650,000 was not spent.
In the next period of time, again, how much was unspent?
CH 114 is the next range,
Yes, sir.
and it began during the period of July 1, 2013, the period it opened. We were allotted approximately $13.6 million. We were required to spend or encumber 85% of that by the following September, which would have been September 30th, 2014. Again, we were expected to spend $11.5 million. We spent $10.5 million by that time. So
Thank you. Just a
fell short.
few more questions. Many folks are asking what happened to the unspent funds. Many have asked me, how do we get them back? But what happened to those unspent funds?
Those funds are redistributed and will probably go to benefit some other division or other schools.
Would it have been helpful to our students if we, the board, knew about this unspending before this weekend?
Well, my response to that is that when I knew, in terms of definitive terms and the net effect of this, I moved quickly to alert the board so that you could position yourself to respond if need be.
Again, all these questions are done with the spirit of fixing the problem, not the blame, as you've already begun. And in summary, myself, our board members, and our neighbors need to understand that we want to make sure there's no shadow governing here, that all understand the problem and can help us fix it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions?
Did you want to go? So, Dr. King, I just have a few questions and frankly, no particular order. So we're now in CH 115.
Yes.
What is our percent encumbered at this point? How much do we believe we're going to spend, and are we on target of spending at the minimum the 85%?
I don't have the figures for CH 115 before me, but part of the review consisted of CH 115, and the current status reveals and indicates that we are on target with CH 115.
Okay, so one of my follow-up questions later down the road will be is that we certainly want transparent accountability on a regular basis, knowing where we are with expenditures of CH 113, 4, 5, 6, and 7 moving forward. I mean, I think it's important that we understand as a board where we are with our receipt of the funds, our percent encumbered, which is the 85% by a certain due date, and then how much is being spent and on which that is being spent. And I feel like that's important for us to know as a board, and I think it's important for the community to know how it's serving the children of need.
If you will note the document and you have not had the opportunity, you will see that that is addressed in the action steps.
Okay. The other questions I have relate to, I think it's important too that we have a culture that we want to share news, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. And so what I would encourage you to do as superintendent, that as soon as you know this kind of information, that we as a board and as a community are well informed so that we can help be part of the solution if necessary or identify the issues that need to be resolved. I think it's important that we be early, transparent, and very public about this funding. This is not our funding. This is Title I funding, comes from the feds. It flows through the Department of Education. And frankly, we need to be the fiscal stewards of this distribution of funding. And it's our responsibility collectively as a board and as the administration that this is done. And so I feel like I will be better equipped as a board member if we are well aware of where we are with receipt of this funding and so on. So I think being transparent about knowing when things are received and so on is important. And also, as superintendent, I would ask you that, again, as soon as you know of these matters, please do come to the board and let us know. I think we need to change the culture, because obviously right now, maybe the culture isn't ideal. The culture needs to be that we share information when we know it, so that we can help be part of the solution and move forward in a positive fashion. The other thing I'll say is I was part of the audit committee for this year, and during that process I learned that every 3 years Title I funding is reviewed by the governing bodies, I believe, of the Department of Education and the Federal Department of Education. They actually come in, so any division that receives Title I funding gets a regular audit. And our audit happens to be this February. So I look forward to knowing a lot about what that audit says, because I want to make sure as a board member that we are using those funds properly, in addition to wanting to know that we're going to maximize them moving forward. And I've asked the question of Dr. Thornton before, was there any misuse of the funds? Or was there any concern of the misuse of the funds? And let me just ask you that so that you can answer it publicly. Were you concerned, or Dr. King, was there any concern that we were misusing any of the funds expended?
No. There was no indication that there was a misuse of funds. We try to, when we submit reimbursement requests, and they have to go through the state's review process as well. So for occasions where funds did not necessarily qualify, then we had to pay for those because it may not have met the deadline, or it may not have been aligned with the original plan. So when the state makes us aware of that, then we have to make adjustments where it's not going to be reimbursed.
So I think that's important for us to ask the question, was there any misuse of funding? So the answer today is no. I look forward to the audit that will come in and take a peek at that as well. And then that report should be coming back to you, I imagine, February, March. I don't know what the time frame is on the receipt of that.
Yeah.
And then we need to share that, obviously, with the public and the community as well. So,
Mr. Chairman.
yes.
As a technicality, the review is going to be a federal monitoring process.
Right.
It will not meet the tenets of an audit per se, but it is an independent set of, for compliance.
Right.
So it won't meet the traditional definition of a financial audit or compliance audit, but it is an independent federal monitoring review process where they will come in and ensure that we are in compliance with federal laws and regulations.
Okay. I think this also just begs the question that if we're concerned that there is perhaps underspending of this grant funding, is there underspending in other areas that we need to know? And so it just simply begs the question of the administration that I ask you to review all of our buckets of funding, and are we maximizing the spend, and are we spending them appropriately? I mean, that sounds like a very simple question, but Dr. King, I would ask you really, that's going to be a very common question after this discussion today. Is you're speaking about Title I, but what about the other revenue sources that come into the division? So I think we need to help the public understand where we stand on the receipt of those additional revenues. But again, you know, as a board member, I feel responsible in that we are the fiscal stewards for the division as well. I mean, we're responsible for budget policies, and, you know, the leadership administration. So it's unsettling, and it's concerning that we didn't spend this money and didn't take the full opportunity. But I look forward to moving forward where we will look at our spend. Dr. King, you're putting a great process into place, and I appreciate that, and you're putting together an organizational structure that's going to be on top of that. So I think that's a great way to address the issues that we face today.
Mr. Jordan, I'm sorry. Well, Dr. Robinson.
I concur with you, Ms. Doyle, on it's disappointing that we weren't able to spend the money, but I'm glad that it wasn't just spent for spending's sake. A lot of times you hear in government agencies where There's money at the end of the year, and it's just spent just because you have the money. I'd rather return it to the taxpayer for redistribution. Obviously, we definitely have the needs, and I'm confident that we'll have the system set up to make sure that we minimize any loss of funds in the future. But again, I would be more upset if we were spending it frivolously, just to spend the money.
Mr. Jordan?
First, piggybacking on Ms. Doyle's comments, I had written down climate communication outputs and outcomes. So a concern that I have is if the building level principal knows that they need resources to serve the children, and they are trying to communicate with central administration about their needs and supports in that regard. If there's a breakdown of communication or some issue with climate where the principals don't feel comfortable communicating that, and then if they do communicate it, are not responded to me that's a big concern. So I would ask, as part of the action steps, that some attention be given to the climate and the communication that exists or may not exist between the building level principal and central administration. On the times when I get the opportunity to visit schools, I'll typically ask, how are you doing? And is anything that you need? And oftentimes I will hear, well, I'm waiting on funding for this or I'm waiting on funding for that, which is why I've come back to some of our board meetings and asked, what's the status of funds getting distributed? So I still think there's a breakdown somewhere between what the principals seem to be asking for and what they do or do not receive. So that's important to me. And Dr. Robinson was mentioning about what was purchased. I'm not sure I know. I would hope that in the rush to buy down at the end of the year that we aren't buying. I don't think we buy anything frivolous. I like to say that, but I'm not always sure that that we buy things under the pressure of trying to make certain deadlines and then put them to effective use. So I do think we need to start having some conversations in this regard, not just about the outputs, what do we buy and when do we buy it, but the outcomes and the effectiveness of the items that we purchase. A couple of years ago, I was just visiting a school, and Title I school, very high poverty school, and walked into the classroom and was just having a conversation with the teacher, and she just made comment about a pencil sharpener. And so I went home and got my electric pencil sharpener and donated. But if we have those type of situations and resources available that aren't getting to the classroom, that's concerning. And so I think we have to be much more diligent and set our expectations much higher in that regard. And then finally, for now, because I'm going to have some additional questions as we go through the proposed budget, we don't have a I don't want to have a whistleblower system, but we need some type of system if we can't fix the climate and the communication, that when concerns are brought, or concerns can be brought and be done in a way that Dr. Stewart described earlier around fixing problems. Because, at our business meetings, we have teachers, we have members of the public who will come and they will share certain experiences or situations that they're in. And sometimes for me, I feel like sometimes information I get there oftentimes proves to be accurate in terms of the needs that they're seeing in the building. And then lastly, in terms of personnel, Dr. King and I talked about this yesterday. I agree that there are certain things that are reserved for closed session. But I think we need to send a message under no circumstances are we going to tolerate anything but straight answers to questions that come from the board or come from the administration about issues like this. You are correct. We have our role from a governing perspective. I think this really falls on the administrative side of the line to making sure that these issues are addressed. But if we bring questions, or if members of the public bring questions, then the superintendent has to be able to get clear and accurate information so he can make decisions appropriately, and then the board has to be in that same position as well. I'm not sure we've had that. I'm hoping that these recommendations will result in that. But if we can't have that, then all the rest of it is really all for naught. So I think it's important that that message get sent, as we've talked about many times, the role of the central administration supporting the success in the building and the students and the teachers in the classroom, that, you know, we aren't going to tolerate anything less than straight answers and honest dealings when it comes to serving our children.
Any other comments or questions? Dr. Debbie?
Yes, thank you. I would also like to echo some of the statements stated by my colleagues. Dr. Stewart, I agree with you. At this point in time, it's really trying to fix the problem, and we should, Dr. King should, in his administration, look at the source as to where things went wrong and fix the problem so that we don't have this situation come up again. And Ms. Doyle, I agree with you. Communication, getting out ahead of the game, letting the board know as soon as possible is so important, because we've been through this before. Many other issues have come up, and the board is ultimately held accountable to the community. We are representatives of the community, and we need to be there for them because we are their voice. This is their school system, and we are in charge of making it as much of a success as possible. And I take that extremely literally and personally. Sending back $1.6 million is more than unfortunate, and I am extremely upset with this situation. And I can say that because I know that myself and my colleagues have asked before, numerous work sessions, taped and not taped. How are we getting the funds to manage gifted resource teachers? How are we getting the funds to increase safety nets? How are we getting the funds to support more of our instructional programs? We even went through a little exercise a couple of work sessions ago about SIG money. And for those of you in the viewing audience who are a little unfamiliar with the terms, it's okay, because all of us had to go through our own mini tutorials. Title I, Title II, School Improvement Grant, that's what SIG stands for. We discussed that, and it was small amounts of money that we were getting worked up about, but small amounts of money add up to lots of money, and any dollar, even if it's for a pencil sharpener, is important for any student who is in need, and Lord knows our district has many students who are in need. So, in moving on, I would like for this board and this administration to never have to give another cent back that is rightfully deserving to any of the students. But I have some questions about what did happen, because in order to fix the problem, we have to know where we went wrong. And again, we heard about this as of last Friday. And Dr. King, when were you made aware that the $1.6 million had to be given back?
There are two funding cycles.
Mm-hmm.
CH 114 that I mentioned earlier, that was the funding cycle whereby the money began to flow during the month of February. So as far as knowing the challenge around the spending for that, the challenge began as the money was flowing, which means that from February of 2014 up until September of 2014, we had the challenge of getting that money to the schools and ensuring that the schools were able to make sound decisions around spending 85% of that. So as far as the challenge and the need to modify plans so that schools could make adjustments to begin to spend those funds, that period was the period of February. But the administration was moving forward with those steps to work to ensure that schools were able to do that. However, the problem with that is that that window was tight. And so the breakdown for that, in that regard, in my view, is that that particular application wasn't approved in a timely manner. When you consider you submit an application in July, it was submitted July 1st of that previous cycle, but it wasn't approved by the state until January. That's problematic. And based on my review thus far, many of the issues around that centered on the fact that we needed to have ongoing communication from my division to the state to make the necessary modifications in a timely manner so that that application could have been approved, so that the monies could have begun to flow much earlier. So as far as the challenge, I knew of the challenge at the point of February, March. However, felt comfortable that we had made the adjustments through the necessary steps to help schools begin to spend those monies and encumber 85% by September. So to answer your question, the net effect of what had occurred, I did not know until the end of December into the first part of January of 15, that the monies were going to have to be redistributed and we were not going to be able to utilize those. So that's that particular cycle. So once the Business and Finance Department made me aware of that piece, the net effect, then also other questions were asked in reference to the previous cycle. That's when I was made aware of the fact that we spent 96% of the previous cycle. And so once I realized that, that's when I notified the board that these issues were before us and that I had begun a review to determine that. So.
And before you came on as superintendent, did Norfolk Public Schools, and Dr. Thornton, you may know the answer to this, did we have any problems with using all of our Title I funds or Title II funds or our SIG monies?
Well, I wasn't here. I actually came on board in January of 13.
Right, right.
So I wasn't here at that time, so I can't really answer what that situation was clearly.
Okay. I briefly reviewed your plan. Are our principals going to get instruction on budgets and how they can ask for monies, or make a budget so that they have a good idea as to how much title funds they can receive and then how they can use them properly so that we're not spending monies on items that we're not supposed to, whether it's professional development or another person in the classroom, etc. How are they going to be instructed of how to prepare themselves to use monies so that we don't have to give monies back?
Those steps will continue. In my view, this challenge is not with the school. This challenge is internal and is at this level.
Okay.
I mentioned earlier, if schools receive their funds in a timely manner, they've developed their plans.
Okay.
They're submitting their plans. It is our responsibility to ensure that they expend the funds based on the needs of the school. And so we'll continue to monitor that. And we'll continue to give ongoing training for that purpose. And work to ensure that, as you have a chance to take a look at this plan, it includes reporting routinely and gauging, projecting routinely where we are with percent expenditure for each of these grant cycles, which will include those schools. And if a school is off cycle, then it will be reflected in that report. If it is off cycle, then it's reported to the executive director in terms of the amount of monies that we are off cycle. And we will follow up with those individual schools to ensure that they know that there are monies that should be spent for safety net purposes, avoiding supplanting, of course, but to help support their site-based plans. So again, we will continue with any training that has already been in place and expand that for individual schools, but in my view, that the need to rectify rests at central level for that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you all. Okay, go ahead, Reverend Hayward, please.
Dr. King, am I to understand that the application was submitted in a timely fashion, but the response back to the state on questions that they had about our application was not done in a timely fashion, and thus that would be the reason why there was a delay in the appropriation of the funding until January, for instance? Is that what we're speaking of here?
I can only say what I know specifically, so I'm not going to attempt to speculate. Yes, the application was submitted in a timely manner. The truth of the matter is that it was approved at a period and a range of time that one wouldn't expect. I wouldn't expect as a superintendent that when we submit an application in July, that it's going to take us from July until January to get clearance to be able to expend funds. I believe, based on my review, and it's going to continue, that the division should have had more ongoing connection from my division to the state around whatever the needs were to tweaking that application so that it could be approved at the state level. What we do know is that there were some issues around Camp Mountain being included as a title expenditure. My understanding that it has been included in the past, but with this particular application, it wasn't approved. So adjustment, that's an example of some adjustments that had to be made that I am aware of at this point. In addition, the whole notion of the utilization of, I believe it was the parent liaison positions, came back with questions, were returned with questions. When those kinds of things happen, the expectation is that we respond expeditiously and make the adjustments in a timely manner so that we can have an application that is approved quicker than a period of time from July until January. So the long response to your question centers on the fact that I think that is our responsibility to ensure that we have the ongoing communication, the ongoing system of check and balance between our division and the state to ensure that those funds flow quicker.
Dr. King, the staffing as it centers around the Senior Director of Title I funding, that there had been some vacancy there at one point. Is that correct? Did that contribute to this problem?
I can't say that I could blame it solely on that. What I alluded to earlier really centers on the fact that the current reorg allowed us to have a position, senior coordinator for Title I, to focus on the day-to-day needs for title funds for this system. And that is the job description of that particular position now, and it's open. It's in the reorg, it's posted, not hired yet. So I do feel that that is huge in terms of being a major player in allowing us to begin to further address all the things that have been pinpointed here.
I know that there is a personnel issue here, but would it be safe to say that your reorg came about as a desire to hold accountable staff for this failure to identify this problem?
If we take a step back and look at when I presented the reorg, I presented the reorg at a time where there were some needs across the staff in terms of efficiency, in terms of real-time movement as it relates to student achievement, data analysis, and real-time action. And so I rolled out the reorg even prior to the net effect of this. And so with this being presented, it also speaks to the necessity to continue to look deeper in terms of the reassignments and realignment that will be made to position us to do the job the way that it needs to be done from a personnel standpoint as well as from a programmatic standpoint. So.
The fact that we have failed to spend this money in Title I over a couple of years, what do you anticipate the effect of this type of funding? Will it impact us in terms of the availability of funding that we will receive in the future?
I can't say that this impacts the availability of title funds, because title funds, the availability of title funds really connects with the percentage of children that you have within your division that qualify for free reduced lunch. As long as you have X percentage of students within your division that qualify for free reduced lunch or economic disadvantage, then we're entitled to be able to secure the funds. The issue centers on, again, timely submittal of an application that aligns with the needs of your organization and meeting all of the federal requirements and the state requirements within that submittal of that application. So that's my focus.
So the fact that we did not use the money in the past won't have a bearing as to how much money they will give us in the future when we make an application for that?
I don't anticipate that impacting the amount of money to which we would be entitled from a Title I standpoint. However, I mentioned earlier that we spent approximately $25.1 million, and we could have spent $26 million. Perception around that, reputation around that is never good. But again, I don't anticipate that it would impact the likelihood of us being able to secure the monies that our children have earned. No.
Well, I greatly appreciate the fact that you have identified that that this problem did not come from the building principals, that they have been using their funding in a responsible manner. I think that's important for us to know and to see. And I would agree with my colleagues, having gone into many of these schools and we look at the budget and we see how difficult it is to come up with the funding for the system. This has a definite, it's tragic in many ways. So But I'm glad to hear that the building principals have been diligent in their budgeting and handling of the funds.
Thank you all very much. Just a couple of thoughts before we transition to the next part of our discussion. Certainly, we know that a Title I federal grant program is not anything new. This is money that school districts have been receiving for a number of years. And as such, my own personal opinion is that somewhere in the system, and I know, as we've heard today from our superintendent, that actions have been taken to identify the issue, but in my own personal opinion, the issue is somewhere in the areas of either planning, implementation and execution, management, monitoring, evaluation, and then qualitative outcome reports, so that we can see exactly what the needs are, how the money is being applied to those particular needs. I think we all agree that we have far more needs than we have money. There's no question about that. And so we ought to be needing more money after we've spent all the money, given all of the challenges, the achievement gaps, and the various challenges we have with regards to accreditation, so on and so forth. So there's definitely some work to be done to identify this. This can never happen again. We just can't. We can't do this again. We have to not just use the money, but use the money responsibly. And I think planning is a big piece of this. I think we know we have a certain amount of money that we're going to get from the Title I funding. Plans ought to be already ready, and just a matter of plugging in those services, hiring the appropriate people that can be hired with Title I money, and executing the programs and services that are appropriate for Title I spending. One of the things I think at the board level that we can do and that we should do, and I'm going to ask that we would begin receiving, just as we received the operational finance report at each of our business meetings with percentages spent for at that particular point in the year, that we would receive a similar report for the Title I and other grant program funds. I know that they run on different cycles, and I know we receive a lot of grant money even outside of Title I. I understand that, but I would certainly like to see us implement a system whereby we receive the same type of monthly reporting on especially these huge grant funds such as Title I, and that we would implement that as soon as possible, so that we can do our due diligence as a board in monitoring the expenditure of this revenue and funding. Any other comments before we move on? Okay, thank you. All right, we're ready now to receive the proposed budget from our superintendent for fiscal year 2015-2016. Dr. King.
Chairman Houston, members of the board. Of course, at this point in the year, this process is routine. I'll just open briefly by mentioning that there are several items of importance for us at this point. Number one, that we continue to work to align our expenditures with the needs of the system, which means that it's connected with implementation of our strategic plan. Of course, balancing is always important in terms of revenue and expenditures, but I'll close by mentioning that compensation as it relates to classified and certified staff, you'll find as an item of interest and concern for us. We also have done the necessary observing and listening as it relates to transportation and compensation that relates to our bus drivers and attendants in terms of considering the proposal. Our Chief Operating Officer has also made us aware of employee health insurance premium increase and what that would mean to the division in terms of expenditures, but also what it could mean to our employees in terms of potentially having employees possibly facing increased health premiums. So with that, we have worked to, with the intent of reflecting that in our budget so that we could be in a position, hopefully, where our certified and classified staff can recognize a real increase in terms of salary and not end up with a penalty, for the lack of a better way to say it, as it relates to the increased premium and those items. Those are just some opening comments, and Dr. Thornton will give further detail and clarity to the items that I've raised. Dr. Thornton.
Thank you, Dr. King. Dr. Houston, school board members, good afternoon again. This afternoon, as you know, I have the responsibility of presenting Dr. King's proposed budget. This will be the proposed budget for the General Operating Fund for 2015-16 fiscal year, that is, beginning July 1, 2015, and running through a 12-month period ending June 30, 2016. As you also know, this proposal from a state revenue perspective is based on Governor McCulloch's introduced amendments to the current biennial budget that he shared with the money committees in December of 2014. Like most school divisions who present this time of year, that is the most recent and available information regarding state revenue. The General Assembly, of course, is in session now. This is the shorter session as it represents year 2 of the biennium. And hopefully, the General Assembly their conferees will take up both the House and Senate versions and reach a compromise on their budget by the end of the month, at which time we will provide the board with an update on the potential impact that the final General Assembly budget will have on our presentation and our state revenue as well. So with that being said, the bottom line, the state funding picture is still in question, but there is some positive news coming out of both the House and the Senate versions related to providing additional funding for teacher compensation based on the SOQ model, which obviously will not fully fund what our and many school divisions around the Commonwealth need to staff their schools. But it is a positive indication that potentially more funding for teacher and support staff from the state will possibly be available pending final General Assembly action. And there's some other variables that we'll be monitoring over the next couple of weeks as we wind down the General Assembly session. So with that being said, I'll proceed with the presentation of the superintendent's proposed budget as of today, February the 11th. Of course, as we present this budget and deliberate it over what would be included in the superintendent's proposed budget, we attempted and are cognizant of the mission of the division, why we exist, the purpose, and that is primarily to serve and support students and teachers. As you well know what the priorities are. So we try to keep that in our minds as we make these decisions. These are not just fiscal decisions, but they're decisions based on the mission and the purpose of Norfolk Public Schools as we strive to become that cornerstone of a proudly diverse community. With that being said, each year the school board discuss and identify and approve its school board and division priorities, which should govern some of the decisions and proposals that you have in the budget today. Of course, at the top of the list would be to ensure full accreditation for all of our schools. We know that that's an ongoing challenge for us, and that would also include the increasing academic achievement for all students. And I think we're all very familiar with these priorities, and you will see that as we go through this proposal, some of the identified funding initiatives, if you will, are aligned with these priorities. Of course, the 5-year strategic plan that you often hear of, again, is intended to influence the decisions that are reflected in this proposal. You've seen this slide before where it bullets for you some recent revenue trends. As you know, Norfolk Public Schools, like many, if not all, school divisions in the Commonwealth, have been suffering, if you will, from reductions in state funding dating back to the Great Recession as we now know it. for state funding reductions cumulative since 2008-9, when we really began to see the effects of the Great Recession. State funding has been reduced by approximately $24.7 million for Norfolk Public Schools, which represents a percentage decline of approximately 12%. Obviously, some of this decline is attributed to our annual 1% average student enrollment reduction. So it's not all attributed to actual reduction in the funding formula, but in large part it is. But we do have a declining enrollment that we've had here, which is not untypical for an urban setting. The second item, as it relates to revenue trend, is very positive in the sense that the locality, being the City Council of Norfolk, has stepped up to the plate in some ways, even with their own challenges, to provide increased funding from a local level over that same period of time, approximately $11.3 million, representing a cumulative increase since that time period of just under 11%. And then finally, federal funding over that same time period has been reduced by approximately $1.7 million. This is not related to the discussion that the board just engaged in with the superintendent and myself. This is related to federal impact aid as relates to those families that are impacted by Department of Defense or military impacted, and there's been an across-the-board reduction in those funding as well. So that's the revenue backdrop to put in context our revenue picture as we enter into this budget process. The major influences, Dr. King touched on a couple of these that are reflected in this proposal. The first of which is employee compensation. You'll see in this proposal that the superintendent is recommending a 2% increase in salaries for full-time contracted teachers and staff and support. As well, this proposal includes funding approximately $1.9 million to support a projected 7% increase in health insurance premiums for division staff for next year. This proposal recommends fully funding that increase, that increase at this point in time would not be passed on to employees. The idea is that the superintendent did not want health insurance, if we could avoid it, did not want health insurance costs to potentially eat into a proposed 2% increase. Obviously, it's all pending upon funding. And again, the projected 7% is what we know today based on the city's estimate. It's subject to change, but we'd like to believe that it is a reasonable estimate at this point in time, but again, it's subject to change pending final decisions over the city in collaboration with the school division. The third item of influence, the addition of locally funded school nurses. You know that for the last 2 years, we have had the requirement of transitioning from school health, Virginia Department of Health nurses, to employing those nurses ourselves. So this would represent year 3 of that 3-year process that we've shared with the board, that if this budget is fully funded, including the 24 positions that are included for school nurses, it will provide 1 registered nurse for each of our comprehensive schools and also a nurse supervisor, bringing the total to approximately 49 registered nurses in each of our schools. Obviously, fully funded is one challenge. The second challenge is the supply and the available and the demand for registered, highly qualified registered nurses. The fourth item is to begin restoring past reductions in instructional technology resource teaching positions. This is a SOQ, or Standards of Quality requirement, that we have at least 1 instructional technology resource teacher for every 1,000 students that we serve in the school division. The fifth item of influence would be the continued implementation of the division's 5-year strategic plan, and then there are some other operating cost adjustments that are reflected in this budget, including property casualty insurance increases and other related type operating costs. What this proposal supports, again, increase in employee compensation that is aligned with division priorities 1, 2, and 7, as well as strategic plan strategy number 3. Increases in health insurance costs, absorbing that projected 7% increase. Again, you can see that it is aligned with priority number 7 and strategy plan number 3, restoring state-mandated instructional technology resource positions. This would restore 5. You'll see some detail later And then the continued phase-in of locally funded school nurses. Again, this is a repeat of the influences I just shared. And as Dr. King mentioned earlier, this proposal also provides additional funding to support some initiatives as it relates to bus driver compensation or retiree benefits, as well as bus attendant compensation for hourly rate. And again, I will share more detail with the board on that as we move along. Also, an increase in facility repair and maintenance, as we shared with the board as we were planning this proposal for the last several years. One of the cost-cutting measures had been to reduce the amount of funding in the operations budget to support the repair and maintenance of facilities. As our facilities continue to age, the repair and maintenance needs increase. So this proposal will include some funding on an incremental basis to restore what had previously been cut in prior years, probably since 2008-9, up and through February, fiscal year 2012. And then what this proposal does not include. It does not include reductions to core instructional programs and offerings. We've heard from the school board loud and clear in the last couple of years that we're not in a position, nor can our students or staff afford to have significant cuts in instructional programs and offerings. What this proposal does not include as well, additional technology infrastructure support services, as we have increased our dependency and connectivity. However, we have not increased the number of support positions that are needed to provide that real-time support for that increased use of technology. And finally, additional program evaluation and data analysis support services. Again, the board, some members expressed the need to provide additional staffing in the accountability research area, but unfortunately, we're just not in a position, per this proposal, to recommend additional staff in those areas at this point in time. The FY 15-16 proposed budget for all funds, including the operating budget, the grant fund, the Child Nutrition Services Fund, and the Capital Improvement or School Maintenance Fund, not including the PPEA funded initiatives that the city is maintaining over on their books, if you will. Totals $372 million. Of course, you know that the disproportionate amount of that is in the operating budget. And this is a graphical presentation of the proposed budget for all funds. You can see that nearly 86% of all funds are appropriated in the operating fund for the day-to-day operations of the school division. Proposed operating revenues. Total, $319 million, representing a slight decline of $200,000 compared to this year's amended. I would note for the board that it says amended. Normally, we will not have an amended budget, but the City Council provided the school board an additional supplemental appropriation in the fall to support some one-time needs that we had identified. Among those would be the repairs of the ceiling and roof at Maury High School. Also, some additional funding to support open campus. That one-time funding has to come out of the base budget, but we wanted to, for transparency of comparison purposes, provide the board with the full scope of funding that was available this year through the regular appropriation that the City Council does in the spring of each year, in addition to the supplemental appropriation that the City Council provided this past fall for the school board. So again, comparing next year's proposed budget of $319 million to $319.2 million, a moderate decline budget to budget of $200,000. But it's important to note here, as we will see in subsequent slides, that this proposal, in order for it to be balanced, would require additional funding support of just under $8.9 million. And what that means is that there is no identified funding source to balance this budget. And again, we'll go into more detail. But as we look at the summary of revenues comparison, if you go back to the top section here, the local city, this represents the regular appropriation, the city, at this point in time, this proposal is based on level funding. Does not reflect a reduction in the baseline funding that the city provided this year, and that's important to note. Of course, the city manager has not presented his proposed budget, and that will not be coming out likely until April timeframe, early May. The next section would be state, standards of quality, state sales tax, lottery funded, and other state funds, including categorical and incentive, a total of $181.6 million, representing a slight decline of $598,000 compared to this year. And we shared an overview with you back in January as to what's driving that. In large part, it's enrollment decline, but this proposal also reflects a restoring of previously reduced Virginia Preschool Initiative funds. But it's my understanding that based on the current House version of the budget, the House would not support the restoring of that funding. So that is something that we're going to have to watch very closely as the General Assembly finalizes its budget, wherein the House is proposing additional support for compensation. The current proposal, as we understand it, does not hold harmless. It basically does not restore the funds for VPI that was previously reduced. And then, of course, some federal, again, this is not related to the major grant funds. This is impact aid and federal Medicaid reimbursements, a slight decline, and that's just realigning our proposal with what some of our actual trends have been in recent years as it relates to impact aid and Medicaid reimbursements. And other, these would just be tuition-based fees. This next item here would be reappropriated carry-forward funds. You know, for the past several years, we have one of our budget balancing strategies, albeit short-term, and that idea has been to utilize operating savings from prior years to balance the budget. And we've shared with the board in at least the last 3 years that this is not a long-term strategy. But in order to mitigate potential staffing reductions, this has been a strategy that we have employed and several other school divisions. But what we also said with the board is that we need to begin to wean ourselves, if you will, off of this strategy. And this proposal reduces the use of one-time reappropriated carry-forward funds from $5.9 million to $3 million, and quite frankly, we don't have much more than the $3 million. The audited fund balance for this past year, ending June 30, 2014, was at $3.4 million. And then finally, one-time revenue sources, of course, as again, it's not ideal, but the city did provide us additional revenue support to balance this current year's budget, and they made it clear, and we understood, and we shared that with the board, that it was one-time in nature. So that comes out of the base budget. So that's where you see the reduction here. But it does not reduce, this proposal is not reflecting a reduction in the recurring regular appropriation from the city, and that's important to note. And then finally, in order to balance this budget as it's being presented today, it will require additional funding support of $8.8 million, which at this point in time has not been identified. And then again, a graphic demonstrating the sources. And then a summary of proposed operating expenditures, again, side-by-side comparison, proposed in comparison to amended. And you can see here the major categories: instructional support, student attendance and health, right on down through central administration. And you can see, again, a very slight decline compared budget to budget this year, proposed to this year. And you can see the significant reduction here under information technology. That's related to the one-time CTI, or construction technology infrastructure funding, that the city reappropriated this year. The idea there was that it was a one-time funding source, and we used it for one-time technology infrastructure related needs at both, particularly at the school level. And again, a graphic. And I apologize for the small font, but this is a more detailed budget change summary of the base revenues compared to the beginning amended expenditure budget and the initiatives that were mentioned earlier. The first of which is compensation increase, a 2% increase is proposed for teachers and staff, full-time contracted staff, combined with the related employee expenses associated with that 2% would cost an estimated $4.6 million. So that's where you see your 3.7 plus your 900,000 is the cost of a recommended 2% salary increase for full-time contracted staff. Yes, ma'am.
So I have a question. So as far as the health care benefits go,
Yes.
the personnel that we have receiving health care benefits are only full-time contracted employees. We don't have any part-time employees that receive health care benefits or benefits that we would be obligated to increase their
Correct.
their spending.
Correct.
And so this 2% covers what the increase is going to be for their health. Help me understand.
This proposal is recommending that the school division absorb the entire increase, the entire 7%, that none of that 7% is passed on to employees.
Okay.
So yes, it would
So a
absorb.
total of 7% is increased, that
Health
would.
insurance premiums.
Of insurance premiums.
Yes.
Health insurance premiums for all full-time contracted NPS employees.
That elect to participate in the program, yes.
That elect to participate in the program. Okay, and tell me how that's broken down into here, that we have a 2%, and then where does the other 5%
So the
come
first line item here is the compensation increase for teachers and staff, a 2% salary increase
Okay.
at an estimated cost of $3.7 million. There are fringe benefits related directly to salary, not including health insurance, your FICA, your VRS. So that next line here is the cost of the benefits associated with that $3.7 million salary increase.
Okay.
So your FICA, your VRS. Again, then the next line item is a separate cost, and that would be your employee health insurance premium at a estimated increase of 7%. This proposal is recommending that the school division fully absorb that and not pass that on.
Okay.
If we were to pass on a portion of it, then yes, it would begin to cut into the 2% salary increase. Now, obviously, that's a decision that we've recommended at this point in time, but school divisions that are challenged, they have to decide, not only Norfolk but others, if we give a salary increase, do we continue to fully absorb health insurance increases, or do we share that increase with the employees? And this proposal right now is recommending that we fully absorb it at a cost of $1.9 million.
That's just the increase.
That's just a 7% increase. Right now, we spend approximately $25.6 million in health insurance premiums in the general fund for those employees who elect to participate. And of course, they pay a share,
Right,
but the disproportionate amount is paid by the school division.
right. Okay. So then, can you help clarify for me what we're doing for, as far as raises go, for our non-full-time contracted employees?
This proposal does not include an increase in the hourly rate for part-time employees, except there is one initiative,
Okay.
and I'll get to and share with the board,
Okay,
related to our transportation bus
the
attendants.
transportation, okay.
Yes. But otherwise, it does not reflect an increase in the part-time hourly rates,
Okay.
nor substitute rates.
Okay,
It's only contracted, full-time contracted staff.
okay.
All right, the next item, representing a recommended increase, again, would be the completion of the 3-year school nurse staffing plan at an estimated cost of $562,000. Because we already have funding in the base budget, right now it would only require an increase of $562,000. And that would provide one RN for each of our comprehensive schools and/or programs. The next line item, again, is restoring 5 instructional technology resource teachers, or ITRT teachers, to begin to align with the standards of quality requirement. Again, if this strategy is approved by the board, it would represent year one of what would become a 3-year strategy. However, it will take more than 5 a year over 3 years to build back up to where we need to be. We need to have approximately 30. We currently have 5, I believe. This proposal would add another 5, so you could see we would need 20 more to reach that 1 per 1,000 to assist teachers in the integration of technology in the instructional program. The next item would be strategic plan, transformation initiative, related costs, including AVID, as we continue to move forward with some of the themes that have been proposed and approved by the board in the transformation initiative, as well as increase international baccalaureate fees, dual enrollment for those high school students who wish to pursue not only their high school diploma, but as well an associate's degree from a community college. And credit recovery for those students who have a need to accelerate credit-bearing courses that are not attending the open campus. The next item, transportation costs for homeless students per the federal McKinney-Vento Act. We are required to provide transportation for our students who, unfortunately, their families find themselves homeless. This is a cost that we have been incurring the last several years, one that hasn't been in the base budget, but as we have over the years begun to reduce the base budget, we need to get this fund in the budget. And we basically contract a transportation service to pick the kids up, deliver the kids to their school.
So, is this about the same amount, the $280,000 that we've been paying over the past?
Yes.
However many
Yes.
years? Okay.
Yes. Haywood, did you? Okay. The next item would be, again, transportation compensation initiative, bus drivers and attendants. I think the board heard loud and clear, and the board asked Dr. King and administration to provide potentially a recommendation around some of the concerns that have been expressed by our bus drivers and bus attendants regarding compensation. This proposal provides some funding to address, in part, those concerns. The first of which, bus drivers are currently contracted for 5 hours. And that is the base for their Virginia Retirement System benefit once they retire. That becomes the credible compensation base. However, those same 5-hour contracted drivers, they actually work 6, 7, 8 hours. They're paid on the basis of the hours that they work. But for VRS credible compensation reporting purposes, they're only being reported on the basis of their contract. They're being paid, they're getting the gross pay, but they're not getting full credit for their retirement benefit. So this proposal, as we met with, per Dr. King's request, following the board's request as well, as we met with, I met with Mr. Kleinbill, and we also met with representatives of the bus drivers and attendants, and shared with them that from the bus driver perspective, this proposal will recommend increasing their contracted hours from 5 to 6, which in essence increases their contracted hours by 20%. We're adding an hour to their current 5-hour base. And what that does, it increases their credible comp by 20%, which, as they continue to stay in the program, become vested over time, then all things being equal, their retirement benefit, if they meet all the requirements, should increase at least by 20%, not including salary increases that will come up in later years. So obviously, we wish we could propose more at this time, and of course our bus drivers wish we could too. But they were appreciative of the fact that superintendent and the board are sensitive to the need. The other item listed here, reference, would be bus attendants. Currently, all of our bus attendants are part-time positions. Ideally, we like to make some of those positions full-time, contracted with benefits, but again, right now, we're just not in a position to make that recommendation. But what this recommendation does include, it includes a 10% increase in that hourly rate. Now, the unfortunate thing is that that hourly rate is only $7.40 an hour. However, it's a 10% increase. And of course, superintendent and team, we wish at this point we were in a position to do more. But this proposal does reflect a 10% increase in the hourly rate for bus attendants. Of course, they would like more, deservedly so, but they appreciate the fact that the board is willing to entertain this recommendation. And of course, with an expectation that over the next several years, if we can address it even more, we would do so. Does that clarify the transportation initiative?
Yes, and they are in full understanding of what the proposal is, and they support it?
The representatives that we met with, some of which expressed their concerns to the board during citizens' comments,
Yes.
they expressed a clear understanding. We tried to give a quick math just so we could see what it would look like to a typical driver who may have made, well, I won't say what they make, but, you know. So yes, the representatives that were there, they understood what we were going to propose. Now, what I did share with them and asked them to do, the representatives that was there, because it was just a proposal, that they would not share it until we went public, because what we didn't want to do is say we're going to, I was going to present it to the superintendent, and then for whatever reason, not because of Dr. King, but for whatever reason, we shared it before the board could hear it. So I can't say that everybody knows, because I asked them not to get out in front of the cart. And finally, other operating cost adjustments. This is a net increase of $173,900. And again, this is related to property casualty insurance premium increases and just some other small increases. And you can see it's very small. Yes, sir. Reverend Haywood.
The question I have, I
Yes,
don't
sir.
know whether this is the appropriate place to ask this question, but it is an adjustment to budget adjustments. And so several of us have talked about the need for a grant writer in the district. Is there in the budget somewhere funding for that type of a position?
No, this proposal does not provide funding for a new position as a grant writer, no.
And would a position like that kind of fund itself in a sense? I mean, that probably would be the obvious when you look at that. Thus, would it be worth us putting, appropriating funding for that position?
You know, obviously a position like that would pursue private philanthropic type grants, not government, federal, state type grants, generally speaking. And because of our free and reduced lunch population or the concentration, we would probably meet the minimum requirements for pursuing those grants, but I can't say with any assurance that the position would pay for itself. It just depends on the type of grants that we would go after and what it would in turn deliver to us, and if we would be able to sustain, because those grants that we would potentially qualify for and potentially receive, they're not, they don't last forever. That's not to discourage the need for a grant writer, but at the same time, it may pay for it short term, but long term, we will have to make a decision if it's worked, do we at some point bring it in and fund it through our own local funds?
Did your previous district have a position like that?
No, sir.
Yeah. Do districts in general?
Some of the larger districts, yes, and Norfolk had one years ago.
I see.
Predating, well, the first time I was here, they had one, but then it's no longer here, of course.
Thank you, sir.
I I would like to know if other districts have a grant writer, and if the grants that they're working on, if those grants are able to sustain their salaries. And I guess we would have to pick up the cost when it comes to their retirement, et cetera. That's typically how it works in, graduate level, Eastern Virginia Medical School. Usually the grants cover the salaries, but I'm not sure how it would work, at this level. But I would be interested to know how other districts are using a grant writer for the philanthropic type grants.
I will say that what some school divisions, larger ones, probably have them in-house, but what other school divisions are also doing, they're using, like us, like Norfolk, they're using their 501c3 foundation to pursue these grants, because some of those grants that we likely could go after may not necessarily want to provide the grant, if you will, to a public entity, but perhaps they would be more conducive to providing the grant through a 501c3 tax-exempt foundation
So
that would
you be
directly benefit.
Speaking of our Norfolk Foundation under Mr. Carlos Clayton?
Yeah, those type of
Okay.
foundations, yes.
Okay.
Yep. But you can do it both ways, combination. All right, to wrap up at this point, again, this proposal would recommend an increase of approximately $9 million in funded initiatives, if you will, bringing the base expenditure budget for 16 to $328.3 million before any recommended reductions, which you will see. Yes, I'm sorry.
Based on this area, Dr. Thornton, you and I discussed at the Budget Advisory Committee meeting earlier this week. I posed a question to you, and I didn't know if you were able to find out the figure or account for this, or will in the future. And that is, with the transformation initiatives and the reconfigured schools, do we have the capacity in place to take the next K class coming in and the next 3 class graduating up at all 4 schools, so that we don't run into the same issue as we did this year, where we had some capacity issues? So we certainly need to address that. Did you have any further thought on that today?
I did do an initial follow-up, and based on our current projected enrollment for K and pre-K right on through 5, and for those reconfigured schools right now, it would appear that we would have the similar level of capacity. So right now, there's no indication that we will need mobile classrooms or portables at this point in time. Now, of course, if we have an influx, we already know that PB Young is over capacity. It was over capacity this year when we made the switch. But right now, those capacities at PB Young appear to be trending to be relatively the same for next year based on projected enrollment.
And so I would just ask the administration to consider, do we have the right equipment, resources, building capacity in place to accommodate that overcapacity today? And do we need to make modifications to make change for next year? So that's just one thing I would ask you to consider. And then secondly, we also discussed that it appears that you're going to have in hand in this fiscal year what's needed at the Academy for Discovery at Lakewood in terms of what they're going to need to fund. And you're going to use transition dollars
Yes.
or attrition dollars,
Yes.
turnover savings to do
Yes.
that. Will you also, or will the administration also have enough teacher funding available into that school as well? So I just want to make sure that we have the technology and we have the facility and we have textbooks and music equipment and so on, but do we have enough teacher FTEs to equip that school based on the number of classes that will be required to staff?
For the startup outfitting of the school, technology, supplies, materials, textbooks, Mr. Smeagol and his planning team, they're finalizing their budgets as we speak. I received a version of it today. So I feel confident that we'll be able to address those needs. In terms of the staffing, that's right now, the staffing is going to be contingent upon what the final application numbers say. And then once we get those, then we will go back and look at what our current staffing capacities are. because obviously when we closed the school, we did not eliminate any FTEs, teaching positions. They were just redistributed. The idea is that if the targeted enrollment for the academy comes in at 650 to 750, ideally, we would be able to recoup those positions that had previously been distributed out, but it all depends on how the grade level class sizes play out based on the applications. So the short answer is it's going to be contingent upon the application and the enrollment. And once we get that, we can better refine what the staffing needs are going to be at the grade levels and the class size initiatives that we have.
Okay.
This proposal does not provide any additional positions at this point.
So you can see the theme of my questioning is similar to that which I've asked before, which is to make sure that we're fully funding our transformation initiatives, including the reconfiguration and the academy, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just going to keep on with that theme to make sure that we're fully funding that. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so again, recommended increases just over $9 million. Before any recommended reductions, the gap, again on paper, is $17.9 million. But as you know, every year we have presented recommended reductions to the base. And this would be the list of those. Each year as we go forward, though, it becomes more challenging to recommend and identify reductions that won't have a direct impact on classroom instruction, particularly as it relates to class size. This past year, current year, one of the budget balancing strategies was that we realigned secondary staffing to address not only enrollment decline, but we increased class size at secondary, middle, and high school. This proposal does not make that recommendation for a second year in a row, but it does recommend reductions, including one-time expenditures that were funded with one-time monies, including the CTI carry-forward funds, wherein those funds that were provided by the city were critically needed. They were to address one-time needs, which we've done. The next item of reduction would be the elimination, again, of one-time expenditures related to the supplemental appropriation, related to the Morey High School auditorium facility need, as well as open campus. The annual rebasing or recalculating of our compensation-based budget based on actual cost to date, what we budget for, and then 18 months later can be very different. And oftentimes when we budget on our current staffing, and then between now and the next school year, we'll have, like most school divisions, we'll have a number of retirees. And they will go out pretty much at the top of the scale, a 30-year teacher, for example. And today's market dictates that they'll be replaced with a less experienced years of service teacher, and there's savings in that. So we rebase the budget instead of just adding on to it. We can't afford to do that. So this process results in an estimated budget reduction of $3.3 million. Obviously, we needed that reduction to pay for the $2 million, the 2% salary increase. The next item, a reduced non-personnel operating costs, and this is related to our regional program tuition, as the number of kids that are identified for those particular services declines, then our costs can be reduced as well. This does not take away regional education opportunities or needs for children. It's based on our recent cost trends. If an unanticipated need arises next year for a student regarding regional programs, then we address them. We don't say we don't have the money. They're addressed. The next item, targeted reductions resulting from program evaluation or our program review process. It says evaluation, but really it was a review of an estimated savings of $345,000, and this is related to two specific instructional software subscription programs that we have in the area of literacy and writing. So we will look to reduce and in some cases eliminate amongst these two programs. And because we're still under contract at this point, I'll just share that with you at this point. But this is the result of the program review process, and Cabinet really vetted the results and determined that at this point in time, this would be the recommendation. Yes, sir.
So all of the review of all of the programs has been completed, and those two software programs are the ones that you feel.
It was a limited review of targeted programs. It was not every program, and I think perhaps at our next work session, we can share with the board which programs were reviewed specifically. But it was not 100% of all the divisions, instructional software programs, but really program evaluation is much more than that.
Yes.
It's actual, the real cost for programs is in personnel. An example of a program really is pre-K. An example of a program is really full-time kindergarten versus Virginia Beach half-time kindergarten. Those are real cost-driving programs. And finally, targeted reduction in non-SOQ staffing, instructional support positions. These are, right now, the specific positions have not been identified, but among them would be central office and those that are not directly interacting with kids on a one-to-one basis in the classroom, that are not supported by the SOQ. We know we have hundreds of support and instructional positions that the SOQ does not fund.
Can you give me an example of what that would be?
It could be central office position, administrative position,
Okay.
an administrative support position. It could be, quite honestly, it could be the type of position could be, not saying the superintendent has not said this is what we will do. Mm-hmm. It could be a specialist. It could be an interventionist type position. But if those positions have not been targeted at this point.
Okay.
And again, in a subsequent work session, we can share with the board a more detailed picture of the resources that are in our schools. Not to target them, but again, just to let you have a snapshot of the resources that are supporting our schools. And then our realignment of school staffing with recent and forecasted enrollment. This will not result in an increase in class size. But as you know, as we continue to have enrollment decline, it gives us opportunity to resize our staffing through voluntary separations. This would not result, the recommendation is not to increase class size.
Okay.
Because you can see just 6 positions amongst our 50 or so schools, 12 positions amongst our 50 or so schools is not going to have an impact on class size. It's not intended to, and that's not going to happen. We're not going to allow that to happen.
Would it have an impact on a program that we offer? For example, if the secondary school, for example, Rosemont of International Studies, if they're offering Japanese, and if there's only 10 kids enrolled in the class, would it have an impact with that?
That's not the targeted purpose, but, I mean, yes. I mean, because, I mean, we could have lower enrolled courses. Is that what Dr. King and the team wants to happen? No. Is that what's being recommended behind the scene with these numbers? No. But the reality is once, particularly at the secondary level, once the course registrations come through, then Mr. Coleman will sit down with principals, and we'll sit down with those high school principals and look at those registrations and see what the class sizes are.
Well, if I may, Mr. Chair, I think it's really important that we make that connection, because us looking at a number and seeing six positions,
Mm-hmm.
when you translate that to how it directly impacts the students in the classroom and how that impacts a parent's decision on a program that they send their child to, that really, allows for connection of tax dollars and how budgets are being spent. So I think it's very important that when we say, and I know that there's no intention to let any of our teachers or staff, instructional, whoever, I know there's no intention to do any of that. I know we want to make our programs the best that they can be. But if we're faced with a certain reality, we need to let the public know from the very beginning exactly what we're talking about, so that that way they can be informed. And if we and if they have an issue with that, they can come and let us know when we have our future budget hearings or what have you. So that's why I would like to have clarity on it.
And again, the intention is not to suggest that that's going to happen.
Right.
But to your specific question, that'll be something that we'll evaluate. Many school divisions, all of which that I've served in, and my colleagues that have served in others, they have thresholds for staffing based on enrollment. Ideally, and I'm just being clear, from a fiscal standpoint, it's not a value statement, but the challenge of having a reasonable class size for your core English, math, algebra needs compared to the class size for, let's say, and my daughters took these classes, French 4, Spanish 4. So if you've got, or German or Latin 4, and it's 8 or so, those 8 are important. They're critical.
Right.
But you have to evaluate that.
Right.
You have to evaluate versus 30 in an English class. You have to evaluate it. That's not what we're saying we're doing. It's not intended to sneak it under the curtain or the tent, if you will. But we have to go through that process. Would you all agree?
Yes, absolutely.
Can I put it in perspective?
Yes, sir.
We have, you're talking about 6 full-time equivalents, correct, at the secondary level?
Yes, sir.
We have 5 high schools,
Yes, sir.
8 middle schools?
Yes, sir.
So that's 1/2 of a teacher out of those schools,
Of an FTE.
of an FTE.
Right.
That's good. How many elementary schools do we have?
33?
33, and we're eliminating 6 positions, based upon enrollment.
Dr. Stewart?
Are we going to conclude this session at 4:30? If so, I have a 3-minute statement that I find very important to say before we conclude this session.
No, we won't be done at 4:30.
Great.
I can assure you that.
Thank you very much. I'll just wait.
All right, anyone else before Dr. Thorne continues?
Okay. Well, that will essentially conclude the presentation as we open, even with the initiatives and $9.1 million in recommended reductions. The funding gap remains at $8.8 million, pending final General Assembly action and any other deliberations that the board is going to have in subsequent work sessions. The next slides are just summary slides of what you've already seen. Detail, revenue, you saw this earlier. Expenditures, you saw this earlier. And then just some next steps and key dates. That concludes the presentation of the superintendent's proposed budget.
All right, Mr. Jordan, are you ready?
I'll yield to my 3-minute friend. If you like to go first.
Go ahead, Dr.
I'm up.
Stewart.
At the last meeting, I said a very powerful statement, so I'm going to try and lighten it up, but you need to understand I'm extremely serious about what I'm getting ready to say. The statement I said last time we were together was, I will not vote for a budget to be presented to the City Council that does not include more learning time. As always, I contend that the most important external factor in schooling for any student is the classroom teacher, as well as the others who teach them daily, from the bus attendants, the bus drivers, to the principal. In my opinion, as in the opinion of decades of educational researchers, and recently, the turnaround requirements for schools, the second most important factor is important to talk about today for purposes of making clear my budget priorities before presenting to the City Council for consideration, and that is time. Time on learning tasks, more time. We who are older all remember the concept of staying after school to complete a learning assignment. More time was added to the school day and often after school for some who needed the time. We who are older may also recall having to do our lessons on Saturday before we could play or play a game. Others may remember summer school for a variety of reasons, more time in the summer. More time during the school day, at the end of the school day, on Saturdays and in the summer are time-honored, sorry for the pun, practices that support educational researchers supported by educational research, as well as current turnaround requirements. More time in many more ways. As a Norfolk teacher over 40 years ago, I employed and observed that adding more time during the school day, after school, Saturdays, and into summer resulted in students learning more. As a superintendent, I employed time in school, after school, Saturday schools, and at summer school to produce documented, significant student high-stakes testing progress. Documented, significant students' high-stakes press. At that time, it was a 6th grade test called Literacy Passport Test. Therefore, for perhaps my last opportunity as a school board member, I entreat my colleagues to support including a request for more time in any or all of the described ways for any and all of our students, beginning 2015, 2016. For the past 4 years and more, our City Council has come to our rescue in Virginia as Virginia leaders reduced and abdicated their financial responsibility to local school systems. Dr. Thornton showed us that in a slide. In addition, our federal leaders reduced support. I believe our city leaders will do what they've always done and come to our rescue for more time. Finally, like the boy who told the crowd when the emperor walked by and they didn't see clothes, there's no more time in this budget proposal yet. Please include more time, resources in order to help our students learn. Show me the more time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Jordan?
Several things. One, I'd like to know if at our next meeting or whenever it's appropriate, if we can drill down a little bit in the area of compensation. So I think the last couple of years I've raised the issue of differentiation. Once again, in this proposed budget, it describes 2% raise across the board. I'm not in support of that. I think that we need to drill down a little more. When we've done the reorg, when Dr. King has done the reorg, it has resulted in several central administrators to get a bump, pretty good bump. Others who've been at that level for a while don't necessarily get that bump. So to me, to just get hired or just get promoted and then just get 2%, just because, I think we should look at that. Likewise, we were just having the conversation about the realignment of the elementary school and secondary school staff. It's true if you just look at it as a mathematical equation, you can have the conversation about how many do you cut at a secondary level, how many do you cut at elementary school level. But over and over again, we know, we just had this in the conversation around Title I, there's some schools that have greater needs than others. So before we just talk about we're just going to eliminate or realign 6 folks at the elementary or secondary school level, I'd like to have some conversation as to whether or not we don't realign but redistribute, so that if there are schools that are in need of support of those positions, again, it's hard for me to tell sometimes if they're real people or phantom, but assuming that they're real quality, highly effective people, that if we determine that there are some needs that can help academic achievement at some of our schools, that we would give that attention. data analysis. We ask for the administration to do quite a bit in the area of data analysis. I think in past years, all right, tell me the name of the department that used to be C's, because I never get it right. ARA. We know that we have cut ARA. From my exposure, the demands on ARA from the building level is increasing, as well as from the board level. And I think last year we talked about trying to restore at least one position or provide an additional position there. Since we are asking more and more from you in terms of data and data analysis and support, then I like for us to discuss that, and maybe the position, maybe it's some changes we make in the school board budget, and somehow we put a data person within the school board's budget. I don't know. I mean, I know it all fits together, but I do think if we're going to continue to say that we're going to be data driven, and we have these data needs, and the principals need data support, and the teachers need data support to support student outcomes, I like that for us to have some more conversation around that. The ITRTs in the lockbox. Can you explain to me the CTI, that's the lockbox, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
The debts for future debt service. Yes.
Right. There's the debt service associated with the
PPEA.
construction.
Yes.
And then there was a cent that goes into some lockbox to support technology, right?
The 4 cent, 2 cent was going into CTI,
Okay.
debt service, for PPEA,
Okay.
basically.
Okay.
1 cent came to the schools for the operating budget, which was last year before last. The other penny of the 4 went to the city for their operating budget. So 2 cent, as I understand it from the city, 2 cent was going to fund future debt service associated with building the schools.
Okay.
And then the remaining 2 pennies, one of which came to the school, was earmarked for the school's operating budget. And then the other penny was for the city's operating budget, as I understood it then.
Whatever money is supposed to, because
That's just.
however you,
Yeah.
it's too complicated for me. Whatever funding that we receive as a result of that to support technology, it supports things but not people, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
I'm never quite sure how much money is in that bucket, but can we, as part of our conversation with the city, ask if they would consider allowing greater flexibility so that it can support things and people needed to support things? I mean, again, I don't know how much it is, but I think it should be worth a conversation because we know we have needs with the things, but if you don't have the people to support the things, then the things never maximize their effectiveness. And if the things don't work, then it just has ripple effects. So
Right.
I like for us to talk about that and discuss that. And then question for you, Title I funds.
Yes.
Can Title I funds be used to provide stipends to support more time or more support for staff at Title I schools?
I'll give a general response because it's all dependent upon the application, what we're currently doing, that it supplements and not supplants, because that's going to be one of the drivers. And if it's included in the division's application, and then subsequently if the Virginia Department of Education approves it. Okay. But it'll have to pass that, I think in large part, it'll have to pass that test of supplementing what we're already doing as opposed to supplanting what we're doing as a division initiative. We can't use Title I money to replace what we're already doing. But it can, I think, if it's approved through the application process, supplement
Well,
Does that,
Would a summer school program in a Title I school be considered supplementation?
but I wasn't even thinking, just so you know, I wasn't even thinking of summer school. I'm just thinking of.
I just use it as an example.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna throw another out. If, we have relationships that we're doing with United for Children. They come in and they provide additional resources to support a variety of things. Are there, and we just had a conversation about, underutilization of Title I. I just wanna know, can those funds support, tutoring? Can they support, I don't know how they paid for it when my children were at Ghent, but they used to have, Saturday sessions.
Yeah.
And I'm just asking that both from the perspective of, I still don't hear us talking about what we're going to do to support hard-to-staff schools, both in terms of retention of effective staff that may leave there because they're frustrated, as well as just providing the additional supports to to the teachers that we are asking to do quite a bit under certain circumstances.
Just a quick comment, of course. Of course, we can look deeper, but title funds can be used for extended learning opportunities. However, centers on ensuring that that extended learning opportunity that we wish to pay for via Title I is not already being offered in the same fashion in a non-title school. Therefore, it would be considered supplanting if that's the case. But the answer to your question, yes, that is an appropriate expenditure. We'd have to look across our division with how we're rolling out plans now to ensure that we don't have that issue before us.
Well,
So-
as part of this budget, I would ask if we could look at that, because we know we have the need, we know where we are today, and if this is a way to address some of that, I think we should consider it. Then the last question for now, SIG funding in the Office of School Improvement. I'm raising a concern for you all to take a look at that I've already shared with Dr. King. I like to make sure that whatever funding that we are receiving for SIG that supports those schools, that we have submitted all the paperwork that we need to submit to receive all the funding that we need to receive in order to provide all the support that we need to support. And I like to make sure that that's in place as we discuss this budget, because if there's something additional, if there's some gaps there that we need to fill, like to, have a better understanding of that. And then we'd just like to have some review to the extent that you can, how effective we are right now with what we're doing in that area. Okay. So that's it for now, but the two main things, I guess, or three main things I'd just like to refocus on is a conversation around compensation and differentiation, ITRTs and the lockbox to support staffing, and then initiatives and focus around retaining our effective teachers at our hard-to-staff schools and or incent them. Oh, and one other question I just remembered. The average, you mentioned earlier about the locality's contribution. What's the average percent of the locality's contribution to education that we're seeing in our region? So I think Norfolk is about at 35%. Do you know what Chesapeake, Virginia Beach, Portsmouth, Suffolk, where they're coming in at?
generally, yes, because it's going to be dependent upon composite index of state. Portsmouth is probably going to be very similar to ours because of their composite index is similar to ours. Virginia Beach, Chesapeake, local is probably going to be hovering around the 45 to 55%, which is probably the statewide, which is really the statewide baseline average.
So
And again, that's composite index driven for the most part. The state's definition of our ability to pay.
above and beyond that,
Yes, sir.
In simple terms, to the extent that you can do it for me,
Yes, sir.
our cooperative competitive districts
Yes.
and the amount of local support that they are providing to their school districts in support of academic excellence, is ours on par or is ours lower than the state average, or what?
As a percentage, Norfolk's is probably lower because we're, again, the state has determined we have less ability to fund it, so the state funds more.
Correct.
So that's why you'll see ours is, state is probably close to 60, I think it's 57%, whatever that percentage is. But then you'll see for Virginia Beach and some of the other, the inverse because of the composite index.
Thank you.
I hope that gets to you.
It's helpful.
But I can bring it back more detail, specific next time.
And it's also looked at, of course, percentage per student, which is another way that the city calculates its contribution in comparison to other cities.
Elaborate on what you mean.
So in one case, maybe 35% for Norfolk, but if you look at it per student, based on what Virginia Beach or Chesapeake provides for the city, on an average per student, Norfolk might be higher.
Right. Well, somebody sent me some data earlier in the week where Falls Church was doing about 17,000 per student. Norfolk was behind Richmond and Petersburg.
Right.
And so I recognize that
Virginia.
the ability of the locality to pay. But when people have discussions around, they're always asking for money, and there's conversation around Title I. It's I've heard some folks say that, well, gee, since you had some issues around Title I, then therefore don't come asking for more. I'm like, no. The needs are what the needs are, and to the extent that we can articulate what the needs are and then demonstrate the results is what I think we should be having the conversation around.
Ms. Doyle?
And just a quick, as the city, as the state, funding has been reduced, and that pie is shifting, albeit incrementally. The state share of funding has declined, which means that the city's has gone up. Wasn't proportional, but it has gone up, percentage. And obviously one can argue if it's enough, but it has gone up because they've had to, in part, make up the difference of the state's reduction.
So if I could, I'd like to just echo a little bit of what Mr. Jordan mentioned. I definitely believe on the drill down and the differentiation, and let's determine if the division's done that before, what was the outcome? If the other divisions have done differentiated pay, what was the outcome? Let's determine what the measure of success is so that we know how successful a differentiated pay model can be. Additionally, I do think we need to make accommodations for our schools that are priority focus, and we've talked about the 3-year Warren schools and looking at them differently in terms of their staffing model, and not that we're taking away from another school, but we're adding to, which gets to your point, Mr. Jordan, as well. I also think we need to consider, and I'm not really sure where it is in the budget regarding the DeJean Richter educational planning, and as we look at that recommendation down the pike in April, what is the budget impact on his future recommendations? What do we need to consider moving forward in terms of school use and allocation? So I don't want to drop that element off the table in terms of budget planning. I think that's very relevant for the years to come. And then I think that as, reconfiguration takes place, as the academy takes hold, as choice becomes prominent in our division, we're going to have a shifting of students throughout the division. And how does that impact a school like Willoughby that has a lower population, lower enrollment, or other schools. So I think we need to look very seriously at our facility capacity starting this next year and moving forward and seeing what the ripple effects, consequences are of choice. So those are the three things, I think, two to echo Mr. Jordan, and then just to bring the educational planning back on the table as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other thoughts, comments on the proposed budget? Yes, Dr. Gabriel?
I'll just keep mine brief. I support examining the differentiated pay modeled and targeted salary increases. I also agree that we need to concentrate on our focus and priority schools. Again, I know that we are probably going to hear a little bit more about this in our next work session, but are there any other ways that we can maybe not see an impact in this year's budget, but maybe in the budgets for years to come, how we can work harder on increasing our ADM, since that's a source of revenue for us. And I've thrown out the idea of increasing IB slots, young scholar slots, which we've done in the transformation. And I think we're going to start to see some of that as Campus Stella becomes online as a stellar STEM school, as the Academy of Discovery at Lakewood comes online. I know that they're getting quite a few applications in from students who are in the private sector. So if we can have a plan of how we can recruit from different entry points, pre-K, middle, and high school, to increase our ADM and have a goal, because if we don't have a goal in place, then we're never going to work to attain to it. And we know that our ADM has been decreasing over the past couple of years. So I'd like for us to work on that as well. And I appreciate your work on the budget.
Okay. I would only say that with regards to the differentiated pay model, concept, what have you, that we need to be really clear of what it is we want to look at. What information, if any, do we need specifically from Dr. Thornton or the administration that will provide content for the conversation? What information can we provide for him or for superintendent to consider? Or it can just become, kind of philosophical conversation and not really move us toward, a decision-making point with regards to whether or not we really want to, consider that. So I'm not speaking for or against it. I'm simply saying we need to be really, really clear about, okay, what is it about, what do we want to look at? Are there particular positions that we want to say, hey, what would happen if we bumped up these particular positions? What are those targeted positions of concern that we feel are deserving, that are oftentimes not compensated fairly, so to speak? So I think we need to be real specific about what we want to look at. We have, when you look at the next steps, you see the number of meetings we have left to discuss the budget. So I just think we need to be really, really intentional and specific. So if today or, this week, there's some more information we want to provide for the administration to consider, so that when we come back together on March the 4th for the work session, whatever portion of that work session we're going to give to the budget, that we can say, well, bring us back information regarding this, or we'll be at this same point of the discussion on March the 4th.
I asked Dr. Thornton, he provided some numbers on, salary increases for teachers only, salary increase for classified staff. Remember, we had the compensation study that we had some questions about, but nevertheless, there were some things that that came out of that. Earlier today, I asked to get a listing of all the cabinet members, and when I was looking at the list, that's when it kind of came to me, just looking at the list of 21 members, that may be some significant number. I mean, my original thought was, maybe the cabinet should forego 2%. And then as I was looking at the team, then what kind of stood out for me was that there were a significant number who, through reorg, have seen recent compensation increases this year. There are others, I don't know what it looks like and all the steps and all those things, but there are others that have been there for a while and may not have received that. So I just think we have to be willing to talk about that and have that conversation because things are tight. And we talked about earlier that, if I can be more blunt about it, that oftentimes when we review things during our regular business meetings, we'll see that a teacher will take on added responsibilities like a grade level chair, and you'll see a little increase in stipend. Then they give up grade level chair, and you see a decrease. We have, an example or two of individuals who are compensated at one level. Their responsibilities have been decreased, but their compensation has stayed the same. And so, while at the same time, down in the building level and in the classroom level, folks are still struggling for resources. So to the extent possible that we can look at these things and figure out how do we prioritize around the classroom and the building. And as Ms. Doyle and Dr. Gabriel said earlier, if there's some specific focus we can give to priority and focus, I think we should review it. I don't have all the answers.
Right.
I'm just asking, can we look at it? Because just going across the board to me just implies that, it's just across the board. And we know that being equal and being equitable are not the same thing. And somehow there are schools and buildings with real needs. And I do have a sincere concern that, at some of our buildings, we know that a large percentage of the teachers have been there 3 years or less. We were talking earlier about potentially letting some of the senior folks go because they cost more, and then having, my words, okay, and then
Be careful.
Be careful.
whatever it is, if they, I know, if our climate surveys tell us that people are leaving because they are frustrated, and if they are senior folks who are high-quality people, I like to keep them. And if it's a climate issue that needs to change in order to keep them, then let's fix the climate issue. But to have a potentially negative climate issue and have somebody who can have a positive impact on our students leave, I want to try to make sure that we're doing all we can that those things are connected. And then the other side of it is, if you spend 3 years in some of our hard-to-staff schools, and they and they are effective, and then we don't keep them, then we go through this continuing cycle of turnover, and somehow in my view, we've got to figure out how to begin to crack that nut. So I don't know if it's compensation. Again, I mentioned before that a lot of studies say it's not compensation. It's about, what do you take off my plate? What's the climate? What are these other issues? Pick one and let's drill down and see if we can impact it and see what the success is. But right now we're talking budget, so that's why I'm talking money. But we talked earlier about coming back and having conversations around what can you take off my plate and some other things. But let's try to do something, even if we just target the bubble schools or target the priority schools or target schools where we know this has been a consistent issue.
Let me just say that to the extent that differentiated pay does not take away from increasing the salaries of teachers and staff, I'm for that. I think that all of our teachers need to be compensated because they're underpaid. And I know there's only but so much money in the pot, And so I'm just, I think that, I know we're not having this discussion here, but I just want to say that I believe that all of the teachers need to be compensated. So if you're talking about differentiated pay on top of that, then, you know, I can understand that discussion. So just want to say that.
Thank you. Dr. Robinson.
You've just argued what I've been arguing for months now, years. It's about climate. People leave because they're frustrated or they don't feel like they're being effective in their jobs. Nobody goes into teaching for the money. They go well and understand that. We lose teachers at the hard-to-fill schools, at those challenge schools, because they're challenging schools. And if we continue to work at that and improve the climate, I think we'll see a change in that. But again, when you look at our numbers, we don't have floods of people leaving our school system. It falls right within the national average of urban school systems. In fact, it's probably a little bit better. So we've got to realize what we have direct control over, direct influence over, and work on that and hope for the best. But continuing to argue for this same thing over and over again is just leading to self-fulfilling prophecy.
You know, as we're having this conversation, I'm reminded that our training tells us to direct our comments to the chair, but I know we are just cordial folks, and I hear you. By definition, I agree with you that you know, working in a school that's in a challenging environment, by definition, brings challenges. As I think Reverend Haywood was just saying, we know that all our teachers face certain stressors, and I would agree are undercompensated. But there's extra stuff there, and so I think some way we have to recognize that there are extra demands that if somebody chooses to work there, one, I think they have to have a passion for it, but the additional things that you have to encounter is real. And so to the extent that we can make sure that the climate is right, the support is right, and the resources are right, if that's what the research shows keeps folks there and have them be successful, that's all I'm trying to figure out how we get there.
Okay. So, as we prepare, and you see the last slide with the next steps, so you see the next steps as it relates to our discussions related to the budget. Now, March the 4th, that's a work session. That is not, that full time will not be dedicated to the budget discussion. Of course, we will allocate a portion of that time, and then, of course, later on, we have the public hearing. March the 11th, that meeting is strictly for the budget work session. And then on the 25th, that's the business meeting. If we have completed our business and are ready, then we would, no, that's not right.
The 18th.
The 18th, yeah, the 18th, we would adopt. The 25th is just placeholder if we don't adopt the budget on the 18th. Now, I'm pointing that out to say that if there is, yeah, that's,
We'll fix it.
yeah, thank you. So if there is particular information that we need from the administration to add to our discussion for the 4th, then we want to go ahead and get that emailed into the appropriate parties, so that we're not, again, spinning wheels, because we really need to be really clear on how we're going to close this gap, what additional funding we want to ask for, and for what purpose. If there are particular priorities noted, I saw you had your copy there.
Right.
if there are particular priorities that you do not feel is adequately addressed, such as more time. I did appreciate the pun, Warren, or the grant writer, or whatever it might be. Now is the time for us to make that clear, so we know in a couple of weeks what it is we want to address. And if additional information is needed for that conversation, we need to request it as soon as possible. All right? We're at the end of our business for today. We'll receive any closing comments. No, actually, there's another item of business that we need to take care of, our training dates for March and April. The first of which is March the 7th. That was a one-day training event in Charlottesville, but I understand Dr. Gabriel informed us some time ago that she absolutely cannot do that day. Correct, Noel?
From what time to what time on that day?
It was one day, and that was for Saturday.
Yeah.
And that would have been 8:30 until 4.
Gotcha.
Now, but it is always important that the full governance team is present for these training sessions, in my opinion. I've spoken with Ms. Patterson, and there are actually 10 people at minimum we have to schedule around. The 8 of us, governance team, Ms. Keys and Ms. Patterson. She, at this point, she as in Gina Patterson, says no more dates right now, maxed out in terms of available dates for the training. Let me add to this so that we can decide what we're going to do. Potential conflict for the 17th and 18th as well.
And that's of April. You're referring to April?
April. I'm in April now. Well, it doesn't look like it. Yeah, we hadn't said that quite yet, but
okay.
yeah, I'm going to go ahead and throw in the April challenge as well, and then we'll open the floor up for discussion and decision making. For the 17th and 18th, Sam, what's the name of the organization? Virginia Principals, the State Principals Association, that's going to be here.
Right.
BASS?
Yes, the ESPAN, the ESPAN National Elementary Principals, the local association will be here during that time.
That's the state.
State, right.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
got an
state
email
state.
on that. They will be here in Norfolk for that Friday, and superintendent needed to be here to at least bring greetings on that day, and I've been made aware of a recognition that I'm to receive on that same day, and then another from a different organization on the 18th. Now, I do understand the importance of this training. But we certainly have these two conflicts. What do you all say? And unfortunately, there were no other dates that I want to be real clear that Gina had she could offer us.
And it has to be the full governance board.
Yeah, this is not something we want to do without everybody. I don't think that's effective.
So she didn't have any other proposed dates for April. I mean, April is just difficult because you have the Easter holiday.
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah.
you have school spring break,
Yeah.
and so.
Yeah, we looked at April and May, and she didn't have any other dates.
So
And
she
even
didn't-
actually when we planned back in around the summer, fall, late summer, early fall, when we planned this year, we were very challenged even in that conversation to get the dates that we were able to get.
So the 24th, if we moved it to the next weekend, the 24th and 25th, and I'm just,
Yeah,
was
she
that
said-
not, that was not available?
No.
Okay, so then we're pushing into May.
She couldn't do May either.
So, I
What are we
don't
trying to
understand
figure
what
out?
we're trying to do then.
But yeah, what do we?
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
if
it's do or die on those dates, to be quite honest with you. She had no alternative dates to provide.
the dates that we're saying that we aren't doing the March training, is that what we're saying?
No, I can't make it, I don't think we should do it.
And then the question is
17th and 18th of,
17th and 18th of April. The question is what?
Dr. King and Dr. Houston both have conflicts on either days.
Okay.
What about the 16th? Because I had the 16th down as part of that board retreat, which is that Thursday.
that was part of the evening going up that evening, but we wouldn't have been training that day.
Okay.
I have a,
Do we want to see if that
meeting.
Thursday is an option?
I have a business meeting that day that only comes like 4 times a year. It's in the morning. I theoretically could do the business meeting and then come up, but
Well, at this point, it seems that we either need to get additional dates from
Yeah,
Gina
so,
Pedersen, or there's really no need for discussion, since it appears
Right.
that if we're not all going to be able to make March 7th or the 17th or 18th.
yeah. So,
But I hate to forfeit the training, frankly, because I think it's very important.
I agree. So let me ask that we will consider this. Could you all submit to me as soon as possible weekdays that you're available? And it will be,
weekday.
a
days,
weekday that I
weekdays.
could speak to Gina about? Because typically we look at Friday, Saturdays. And so if there's a weekday that we could commit to it, could be, 8 to 4, drive in the morning, back in the evening. For the month of April, the weekdays that'll,
In March, you don't need a weekday.
I would say April, well,
Well,
Yeah.
why don't we do this, since the March date was just a 1-day training.
right,
And the April was a 2-day training.
right.
Is there a way that we can do maybe a 2-day during the week? I know it's hard for everyone's schedule, and I understand if it's not, but, and then just not have the 2 separate sessions and just do
I'm with you.
do sessions as a combination one.
Mhm.
Would
mean, I could do that. I don't think-
would that work for the board to offer those suggestions? I mean, if not, then, I mean, it's definitely hard for me, but
Yeah. What are you thinking, Rodney?
Tell me again what the conflict is. I guess
Don't
I'm,
force it.
weekends.
we have a real challenge. So, one of the things that we're working on is professional development training with some state requirements associated with where we are. And somehow I think we have to prioritize that. So, I don't know what all the conflicts are. If it's something like if we start later, I don't know if you have to be there in the morning or if you have to be there in the evening. If there's some adjusting we can do with the time frame on the existing days. Because like you said, it was hard to get those dates down. It doesn't sound like we're going to have much success trying to get 10, 12 people together.
Right, same.
I stated earlier that for the 17th, I think, of April, that my conflict is not for the full day. So it could be that I would miss a portion because the meeting, the activity that is the regional principals session is local here at the Marriott. So once I complete my piece, then I can be in place. So I don't have a conflict past that period of time. I just need to see what slot they have me in, and I could probably get them to work with me to adjust it to be the early slot. Or whatever slot I need to, possibly. So, there are some possibilities for me. I don't know about Diane, so.
And I'll speak with the individuals of both of those sessions regarding.
That's right. You said you had 2 things.
Yeah, but I'm willing to consider it. I mean, I'll speak to the persons from each of the organizations for that Friday and Saturday. We're talking April now, not March.
Yeah, I do not have a conflict for the 17th or 18th right now, so.
Okay.
Right now, I am canceling March 7th, right? Excuse me, March 7th. I'm taking it off. I'm going to schedule other things on that day. Is that right?
Yeah, what you gonna put on that day?
I can't tell you.
Okay, so I will, by close of business tomorrow, let you know of my success in having a conversation with the representatives from both of those organizations for that Friday and Saturday. Okay?
Very good.
All right. Dr. Stewart, any final thoughts? All right. Reverend Haywood, Dr. Gabriel.
Just that I would ask the division to continue to critically analyze all of our funding streams and to analyze ways that we could increase our sources of funding. I am in support of more time in every aspect that it could possibly mean. To our Norfolk residents, know that the school board is accountable to you, but more importantly, we are accountable to the 33,000 or so students that we have in the classrooms, and that is our dedication. That's why we're here. Student success equals school success, which equals division success, which equals city success. We have to support our teachers, and our parents have to support the students in order to help our students succeed. And with that, I thank everyone for their attention in all of the matters that we are dealing with, and I hope for success for all of our students and teachers.
I'm still angry, but I hope that the changes that we've talked about will make things better. Dr. King and I have talked, and he's working on putting together some things that will get shared with the full board, some questions that I had as a result of some of the things that we talked about earlier. So I'm going to be looking forward to getting those things for us to be able to talk about them. We do have the budget gap. In my earlier comments, I talked a lot about on the spending side. I didn't talk much on the reduction side, so I know we're still going to have to deal with that. But I don't want us to surrender trying to make the argument to the citizens that the things that we believe we need for our children are indeed needed, and go make that case and see what we can get, and then come back and adjust accordingly.
I would simply reiterate the items that I emphasized earlier, and look forward to moving forward in a positive way.
Thank you. Ms. Doyle?
You know, I would agree that the underutilization of the spend really is unacceptable. I appreciate, Dr. King, your action plans being put in place, and I think the only way we're going to regain confidence and restore confidence from the community is to be fully transparent about living up to those action plans and being transparent about the spend of all of our revenue streams on a regular basis in a reporting fashion. And when we know there are some areas for improvement, that we share those with the board and the community as quickly as we know them, and that we find the solutions to those issues moving forward. But this was a serious week for the division, and I think we need to work very hard to regain the confidence of the community, and I look forward to working with the board and the division in doing that.
Thank you. Certainly, as it has been said on many occasions, we are the stewards of our most precious asset, and that is our future and our children. And so I certainly ditto the sentiments of the entire governance team in this, I say even breach of stewardship. And so I definitely look forward to us following up and through on the changes we need to make in order to ascertain that this definitely doesn't happen again, and that we give all of our children and families the best opportunity for success by utilizing every resource that's at our disposal. And that's all of our responsibility, and I certainly will hold up my end of it. So thank you all. I think there's one other thing, and Ms. Doyle will share it, and we will adjourn.
So Ms. Linda Stokes, who is one of our regulars at our meetings, and we're thankful for her participation, very kindly today is bringing us cupcakes, if I'm not mistaken, to appreciate the Norfolk School Board members. It is an appreciation month for us. And so, Ms. Stokes, thank you very much for being here today and for your stewardship and working with the division and making us a better division as well.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
So,
This
thank
is
you.
just something that shows our appreciation.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. All right, please get your cupcake and enjoy it on your way out. Try not to drive and eat those things. All right, have a good evening.
Thank you.